In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. The 41st millennium is a crucible of endless conflict, a universe where gods walk among mortals, where demons claw at reality, and where humanity clings desperately to survival under the rule of the Imperium. Into this setting of unrelenting darkness, let us imagine a most unusual interloper, the spirit of vengeance himself, Ghost Rider. A figure born of supernatural judgment in another universe, imbued with hellfire and cursed to punish the guilty. Ghost Rider is a being defined by both damnation and righteousness. The question we explore today is simple, but carries staggering implications. What would happen if Ghost Rider entered the Warhammer 40K universe? To begin answering this, we must first understand the essence of Ghost Rider as he exists in his own world. Ghost Rider is not a single individual, but rather a mantle passed through mortals who have become bound to a spirit of vengeance. The most famous incarnation is Johnny Blaze, the stunt motorcyclist who made a deal with Mephisto and was bound to the demon Zarathos. The rider manifests as a skeletal figure wreathed in ethereal fire, his flesh stripped away in a blaze of eternal damnation. His motorcycle transforms into a demonic steed, roaring across any terrain with impossible speed. His powers are vast: superhuman strength, near invulnerability, hellfire manipulation that burns both flesh and soul, and of course, the terrifying penance stare, a power that forces his victim to feel all the pain they have inflicted upon others. This combination of abilities makes Ghost Rider not merely a supernatural vigilante, but a cosmic enforcer of justice, straddling the line between mortal free will and divine punishment. In his universe, he is a feared, unstoppable figure, able to defeat even gods and demons. But how would such a figure translate into the grimdark future of Warhammer 40K, where gods of chaos, ancient alien powers, and unyielding human institutions dominate reality? First, we must consider the warp, the roiling dimension of psychic energy that underpins the 40K universe. It is both the source of psychic power and the realm of the chaos gods, beings of immense and terrifying influence. Ghost Rider's powers are not technological, nor are they psychic in the conventional sense. Instead, they are mystical, rooted in hellfire and infernal judgment. Within the 40K framework, such powers would almost certainly be interpreted as warp-based phenomena. The Imperium, ever suspicious of sorcery and mutation, would almost immediately brand Ghost Rider as a dangerous heretic or witch. The Inquisition, those shadowy enforcers of imperial purity, would hunt him relentlessly, believing him to be a demon host or a creature of chaos. And yet Ghost Rider is not a servant of chaos. In fact, his mission, to punish the guilty, to exact vengeance upon those who harm the innocent, aligns in some ways with the harsh doctrines of the Imperium. Imagine Ghost Rider riding into a hive city, chains blazing, burning through gangs, heretics, and cultists alike. To the common citizen, he might appear as a holy avenger, a saint descended from the Emperor himself. Stories would spread quickly: the fiery skeleton upon the burning steed, who judged sinners in the dead of night. In a society starved for hope and miracles, Ghost Rider might even be revered as an angel of the Emperor, despite the Inquisition's suspicion. Yet there is a darker side to this. Ghost Rider's powers compel him to punish the guilty, and in the Imperium of man, guilt is everywhere. The Imperium is built on corruption, cruelty, and endless sacrifice. Governors exploit their subjects, commanders send millions to die, priests preach dogma while hoarding power. How would Ghost Rider distinguish between the petty criminal who steals to survive and the planetary governor who condemns billions to starvation? His penance stare is absolute. It reflects not context, but the sum of inflicted suffering. Entire ruling classes might crumble beneath his gaze. Ghost Rider's presence in the Imperium could become not a symbol of hope, but a cataclysm that tears down the very structure of imperial rule. But the Imperium is not the only force to consider. The forces of chaos would undoubtedly take notice of such a being. Ghost Rider's soul, bound to Zarathos, or a similar spirit, resonates with infernal power. The Chaos Gods would view him as a rival, perhaps even a prize. Khorne, god of blood and war, would admire his fury and destruction, seeking to twist it into endless slaughter. Slaanesh, god of excess and torment, might covet the agony Ghost Rider inflicts upon his victims. Tzeentch, master of manipulation, could attempt to ensnare the rider in schemes of corruption. And Nurgle, patron of decay, would see in Ghost Rider a flame that must eventually be smothered. However, Ghost Rider's defining trait is resistance. He is a slave to no one, bound not to chaos, but to his singular purpose. His hellfire burns not only flesh, but also the very soul, which means he could conceivably burn away demonic essence. Imagine the sight of a greater demon striding onto the battlefield, only to recoil in agony as Ghost Rider's chains sear its warp-forged flesh. His penance stare, too, might prove devastating to such creatures, forcing them to confront the suffering they have inflicted across millennia. Against chaos, Ghost Rider might be one of the most effective weapons conceivable, a lone avenger whose very nature is antithetical to corruption. This raises fascinating possibilities. Could the Imperium, despite its paranoia, be forced to accept Ghost Rider as an ally against the greater threat of chaos? Would the Inquisition harness his power, unleashing him upon heretic worlds? Or would they condemn him outright, choosing to destroy a potential savior out of fear that he was yet another demon in disguise? The tension between Ghost Rider's mission and the Imperium's rigid dogma could form the heart of countless conflicts, shaping the way he is perceived and the way he acts. Before moving deeper into these scenarios, we must also consider the Xenos races. How would the Eldar view Ghost Rider, with their deep knowledge of the warp and its dangers? Would they see him as a shard of some forgotten god, or as a weapon too dangerous to exist? The Orcs, with their simplistic worldview, might simply see him as a really loud Bernie boy and relish the chance to fight him. The Necrons, soulless and ancient, might be among the few beings truly resistant to his powers, their necrodermis bodies immune to hellfire, and their lack of souls rendering the penance stare useless. Against the Tyranids, Ghost Rider's abilities would be tested in entirely new ways, as the hive mind operates without guilt in the conventional sense. The arrival of Ghost Rider in the Warhammer 40K universe, therefore, is not a simple matter of power, but of perception. He would be a mirror held up to the grimdark setting itself, exposing the corruption, cruelty, and hypocrisy that define it. His story would not merely be about survival, but about judgment. Judgment upon a galaxy drowning in blood and despair. And so we arrive at the first conclusion of this exploration. Ghost Rider's entry into Warhammer 40K is not merely a crossover of characters, but a clash of metaphysical concepts. Justice, vengeance, and damnation collide with faith, corruption, and survival. In the parts ahead, we will dive deeper into each faction's likely reaction, the wars Ghost Rider might ignite, and the ultimate question: Could the spirit of vengeance truly survive in a galaxy where there is only war? We began with the Imperium of man, where he straddles the line between holy avenger and heretical monstrosity. But to expand further, we must place him into scenarios that define the grimdark fabric of this universe, asking not only how he would survive, but also what ripples his presence would create across a galaxy where even the smallest anomaly can alter millennia of struggle. Let us start with the Inquisition itself, the body most likely to encounter Ghost Rider first. The Inquisition is ruthless, divided into ordos with differing goals. The Ordo Hereticus seeks out heresy within humanity, the Ordo Xenos combats alien corruption, and the Ordo Malleus fights demonic threats. Ghost Rider's existence blurs all these categories. To the Ordo Hereticus, he would appear as a witch, channeling unnatural power. To the Ordo Xenos, he may be mistaken for a previously unknown alien abomination. To the Ordo Malleus, he is perhaps most fascinating, a being with powers resembling the warp, yet not tethered to chaos. Imagine the debates within inquisitorial conclaves. Some would argue Ghost Rider is a dangerous unknown that must be purged without hesitation. Others, more pragmatic or radical, might whisper of his potential as a weapon. The Ordo Malleus especially could see in him an instrument to fight demons, a living embodiment of judgment, capable of reducing greater demons to ash. The question becomes whether such a weapon can ever be controlled, or if even attempting to bind him would trigger his wrath against the Inquisition itself. This tension highlights Ghost Rider's greatest narrative challenge within 40K. His powers are not beholden to imperial dogma, nor can they be easily categorized by existing frameworks. The Ecclesiarchy, for instance, might claim him as a saint of the Emperor, while the Inquisition seeks to classify him as a demon. To the average citizen, the distinction hardly matters. What they see is a burning skeleton riding through the night, purging corruption with chains of fire. For them, hope and terror are the same thing, and Ghost Rider embodies both. Yet the Imperium is only one piece of the galaxy. We must now turn our gaze to the Xenos, beginning with the Eldar. The Eldar are an ancient psychic race whose very souls are preyed upon by Slanesh, the chaos god of excess. Their culture revolves around escaping damnation through the rigid paths they walk, and through reliance on spirit stones to preserve their essence. To an Eldar seer, Ghost Rider would be a terrifying anomaly. His soul is visibly aflame, his essence wrapped in infernal chains. He would appear as a shard of something ancient, perhaps even a forgotten godling or a weapon of the warp. The Eldar might approach Ghost Rider with the wary respect they reserve for uncontrollable forces. They know too well that tampering with what they do not understand leads to ruin. A Farseer might attempt to read his fate in the skeins of destiny, only to recoil at the sheer impossibility of it. Ghost Rider's mission is vengeance, pure and unyielding, and this does not align with the great currents of fate the Eldar navigate. He would be outside their prophecies, a wild card they cannot predict. To them, that makes him both dangerous and oddly liberating, a force of destruction that could potentially be turned against chaos or even rival Xenos empires. Now contrast this with the Orcs, the brutal green-skinned hordes who live only for war. Orcs do not dwell on philosophy, morality, or the warp's subtlety. To them, Ghost Rider would simply be a proper fighty git with fire. The sight of a blazing skeleton roaring across a battlefield on a flaming bike would delight them endlessly. They would swarm to fight him, laughing even as they burned, eager to prove themselves against such a spectacular foe. Ghost Rider, in turn, would cut through them mercilessly, his hellfire incinerating thousands. Yet the orcs' sheer numbers and resilience would mean the fighting never truly ended. For Ghost Rider, facing the orcs could become an endless purgatory. No shortage of guilty souls, no shortage of violence, but no real victory either. The Necrons, on the other hand, present a unique challenge. The ancient soulless machines of a forgotten empire. The Necrons have no true essence for Ghost Rider to burn. His penance, stare, reliant on reflecting inflicted suffering back upon a soul, would find nothing to grasp within them. To the Necrons, Ghost Rider would be an annoyance at best, a fiery obstacle standing in the way of their dynastic ambitions. His flames might char their necrodermis bodies, but they would not suffer in the way organic beings do. This creates an inversion. Ghost Rider, a nightmare to most living creatures, finds himself facing an enemy he cannot judge. Against the soulless tide of the Necrons, his greatest weapon becomes irrelevant, forcing him to rely solely on his physical strength and hellfire. With the Tyranids, we encounter yet another paradox. The Great Devourer is not a collection of individuals, but a singular hive mind, spanning countless organisms. Guilt, in the sense Ghost Rider recognizes, does not exist for the Tyranids. They consume because that is their nature, not out of cruelty or malice. The penance stare would fail against them just as it does against the Necrons. Yet Ghost Rider's flames, mystical in nature, could still ravage their chitinous forms. Picture a swarm world ablaze. Ghost Rider riding across oceans of bioforms, his chains slicing through monstrous creatures as firestorms erupt in his wake. Still, he would soon realize this battle is endless. The swarm cannot feel guilt, and therefore cannot be judged in the way he is designed to judge. All of this raises a troubling question. What is Ghost Rider's true place in a universe where so many enemies are either soulless or beyond guilt? The Imperium, racked with corruption, provides endless targets, but the larger threats of the galaxy, the Necrons, the Tyranids, even the Orcs, lack the moral culpability that fuels his vengeance. Would Ghost Rider then become fixated on humanity itself, turning his wrath primarily inward upon the Imperium? Would he judge not only the guilty leaders, but also the endless cycle of cruelty that defines Imperial survival? In doing so, he might inadvertently weaken humanity's defenses against external foes. His curse demands punishment of the guilty, but in 40K, guilt is not just an individual matter. It is systemic, structural, woven into the very survival of the Imperium. Thus, Ghost Rider's existence forces us to confront one of the central paradoxes of Warhammer 40K. Can true justice even exist in such a universe? The Imperium thrives on injustice, chaos feeds on suffering, and alien species act according to their natures rather than moral choice. Ghost Rider, unyielding and absolute, would stand in judgment not just of individuals, but of the galaxy itself. And in that, perhaps, lies his most terrifying role. Not a hero, not a demon, but the mirror that reveals the 40th millennium for what it truly is. As we move forward, we must examine in greater depth how the forces of chaos themselves would respond to Ghost Rider. Would they seek to corrupt him, to twist his vengeance into their own dark designs, or would they find themselves uniquely vulnerable to the flames of his wrath? The warp, after all, is a realm of souls and suffering, and Ghost Rider may be the one intruder capable of burning it from within. Now that we have established the Ghost Rider's presence in the Imperium and the immediate violent ripple effects of his arrival, we need to understand how his existence would challenge not only the battlefield, but also the very foundations of the Imperium's culture, faith, and governance. Because Ghost Rider is not simply another warrior or Xenos intruder, he is an entity whose power stems from a metaphysical covenant, an infernal bond between human soul and otherworldly judgment. In the context of Warhammer 40K, where the warp defines much of reality, Ghost Rider would naturally be interpreted in conflicting and dangerous ways. To most Imperial citizens, even the briefest glimpse of the Rider would confirm their deepest superstitions. The Flaming Skull would be read as a demon host, a vessel of chaos, or perhaps some cursed saint. The ecclesiarchy would almost certainly brand him as a heresy against the God Emperor's divinity. His powers, which appear to draw on something not unlike the warp, yet seem entirely divorced from chaos, would baffle the Ordo Malleus. Here lies the paradox. Ghost Rider wields abilities that appear hellish, but do not align with chaos corruption. He burns demons, shatters sorcery, and inflicts judgment that transcends psychic manipulation. This anomaly would force the Imperium to rethink its categories of saint, psyker, heretic, or abomination. From the moment the Rider's existence spreads beyond battlefield rumors, the Inquisition would mobilize. A figure of his magnitude cannot be left unclassified. The Ordo Hereticus would brand him dangerous, for his powers circumvent ecclesiarchy authority. The Ordo Xenos might dismiss him, but the Ordo Malleus would likely declare him a new kind of warp anomaly. Interrogators and inquisitors would pursue him not simply to destroy, but to contain and study him. Yet the very act of attempting to contain Ghost Rider would result in catastrophe. For the Rider cannot be shackled by chains of steel or psyker wards. He is bound only to his divine curse, his penance mission that transcends any inquisitorial writ. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, stories of the Rider would spread faster than inquisitorial censorship could suppress them. Guardsmen who witnessed his judgment would speak of a flaming angel of wrath. In worlds plagued by chaos cults, word of the Rider's ability to annihilate the guilty with a stare would ignite revolutionary fervor. Heretics would begin to fear him more than commissars. Loyal citizens might mistake him for a saint of the Emperor, a punishing revenant sent to cleanse corruption. It would not take long before shrines dedicated to the Skull of Fire began appearing in the shadows of hive cities, painted in soot and blood. This religious dimension is where Ghost Rider becomes not merely a combatant, but a destabilizing symbol. The Imperium thrives on controlled worship, tightly managed by the ecclesiarchy. Saints are canonized through bureaucracy and manipulation. Miracles are curated. A figure outside their control, one who performs miracles of fire and judgment without their sanction, undermines the ecclesiarchy's authority. Imagine an underhive congregation chanting prayers not to the emperor, but to the burning skull who delivered them from a gang of heretics. Imagine pilgrims seeking the Rider's appearance instead of kneeling at imperial shrines. That kind of spontaneous faith would be treated as heresy, no matter how beneficial the Rider's acts. And yet, not all factions would see him as an enemy. Some would see opportunity. The Adeptus Astartes, particularly chapters like the Black Templars or the Space Wolves, might view the Rider as a living weapon of faith. The Black Templars, who already sanctify their crusade with divine zeal, could interpret him as a sign of the Emperor's wrath manifest. While the librarians and chaplains might debate his warp signature, frontline warriors would care less about theology and more about the fact that he slaughters demons without hesitation. To them, that might be proof enough. Imagine a scene where the Rider rides alongside a Crusader squad, his chains burning with unholy fire as a Black Templar zealot declares him the Emperor's spectre. On the other hand, the Mechanicus would perceive him as a living enigma that defies logic. His hell cycle, a machine of infernal origin, would be of immense curiosity. How does it function without fuel? How does it merge with its rider? They would see in him a forbidden technology, perhaps even a proto-machine spirit far beyond their comprehension. Adepts would clamor to capture or dissect him, even as their faith warned them of the heresy of touching such a construct. The schism between curiosity and orthodoxy would tear at their ranks. The question of chaos, however, looms largest. If the ruinous powers became aware of the rider, how would they interpret him? Khorne would despise his selective wrath. Judgment is not the mindless slaughter the blood god demands. Slaanesh would loathe him for the agony he inflicts without indulgence. Tzeentch might seek to twist his curse, but the rider's power is not one of scheming. It is of unyielding punishment. Only Nurgle, perhaps, would find amusement in the rider's endless torment, watching a soul enslaved to judgment without ever finding peace. Demons would fear the rider because his fire does not merely kill, it sears the soul, leaving nothing for the warp to claim. His penance stare would be a weapon even the most ancient demons could not endure, for it forces them to suffer every atrocity they have wrought. In that sense, Ghost Rider would become the greatest terror the warp has ever known. Yet with every action, he destabilizes the Imperium further. When he burns a corrupt governor, he saves a world from oppression, but in doing so, he undermines the Imperium's hierarchy. When he annihilates a Chaos warband, he prevents corruption, but leaves behind whispers of a flaming judge who answers to no inquisitor. The more he acts, the more he forces the galaxy to confront a dangerous question. If justice can exist outside the Emperor's institutions, what is the point of the Imperium itself? The paradox sharpens here. Ghost Rider's mission is not conquest nor revolution, but vengeance against the guilty. He cannot be bribed, controlled, or diverted. In a galaxy where power relies on manipulation, the Rider represents incorruptible judgment. That incorruptibility makes him the ultimate destabilizer. As we move forward, the question becomes, how long could the Rider exist in the galaxy before every major faction, imperial and otherwise, is forced to respond? And perhaps more importantly, what would happen if Ghost Rider himself began to sense the deeper truth of the warp, the place that looks so much like the hell his curse was born from? Would he see demons as kin, or as the ultimate extension of his eternal punishment? Ghost Rider's existence within the Warhammer 40K universe inevitably leads us to one unavoidable collision, his confrontation with the warp itself. For the Rider is not merely a warrior or a hunter of the guilty. His powers stem from a metaphysical contract, a curse that binds a mortal soul to an infernal force of judgment. In the Marvel universe, this is framed as a deal with Mephisto, Zarathos, or other hellish powers. But in the grimdark cosmos of the 41st Millennium, where the warp is both the source of all psychic energy and the seat of chaos, this infernal contract takes on a much darker resonance. The warp is not hell in the Christian sense, nor is it a singular underworld ruled by a devil. Instead, it is an ocean of raw emotion and psychic energy, shaped by the collective consciousness of the galaxy's living species. It is infinite, mutable, and treacherous. Within its depths, the four great chaos gods reign: Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, each embodying primal aspects of mortal existence. For psychers and demons, the warp is a second home, a place of both power and peril. For the Rider, however, the warp is something different, a reflection of the curse that defines his very being. His flames are not psychic, but they burn with a supernatural authority that eerily parallels the warp's own destructive essence. If Ghost Rider were to breach the Imperium, either pulled in by sorcery, summoned by cultists, or dragged into it while battling demons, the results would be staggering. Unlike mortals who risk madness and mutations simply by existing within the warp, the rider would enter already aflame, his soul fused with an infernal presence that resists corruption. Where a psyker must rely on wards or faith to survive, Ghost Rider's very curse would act as his armor. His presence would manifest not as a fragile human drifting in a storm, but as a blazing predator stalking through the depths of unreality. The demons of chaos would not know what to make of him. For entities born of raw emotion, he would appear as an abomination, something both like and unlike them. His hellfire would burn away their essence, severing them from the warp itself. Unlike a banishment from a psyker's exorcism, which merely forces them back into the Imperium, Ghost Rider's fire could annihilate their core, leaving them unable to reform. Imagine the terror of a demon prince who has endured countless banishments, suddenly realizing that the rider's flame is not exile, it is final death. Chaos cultists, meanwhile, would view the rider with awe and dread. Some might mistake him for a demon prince of Khorne or a cursed avatar of Slaanesh, for his aesthetic overlaps with both violent fury and infernal spectacle. Others might declare him a heretic saint of the dark gods, a herald of some new age of torment. Yet when the rider turned his gaze upon them, they would learn the truth. He has no allegiance to chaos, nor to the Emperor, nor to any god of this universe. He serves only the curse of judgment, a sentence of guilt and vengeance that transcends any theology. The implications here are profound. If Ghost Rider's flames can truly annihilate demonic entities, then he represents something the galaxy has never seen, a weapon of finality in a cosmos defined by eternal struggle. The Imperium wages endless wars because chaos cannot be destroyed, only resisted, delayed, or banished. But the rider's curse changes the equation. Suddenly, greater demons that once plagued systems for centuries could be permanently slain. Warp rifts could be cleansed not by dangerous exterminatus-level purges, but by the judgment of a lone, burning rider. For the first time in the history of the 41st millennium, chaos would face an executioner it could not outlast. Yet the chaos gods themselves would not sit idly by. Each would respond to Ghost Rider in their own manner. Khorne, the blood god, would despise him, not for his violence, but for his restraint. Khorne demands slaughter without reason or judgment, and Ghost Rider's selective punishment offends this principle. Still, Khorne might find him a worthy opponent, a warrior whose wrath embodies the purity of battle even if it denies the blood god's creed. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, would be intrigued. Here is a being whose existence defies categorization, whose curse is neither psychic nor demonic, whose mission is absolute and unyielding. Tzeentch might attempt to manipulate the rider, whispering promises of unraveling his curse or granting him freedom. Yet the rider is immune to lies, for his soul is already bound. What manipulation could sway a man enslaved to vengeance? Slaanesh would loathe him. To inflict agony without indulgence, to burn without savoring, to torture without pleasure. This is an abomination to the Prince of Excess. Ghost Rider is pain without decadence, torment without artistry, suffering without satisfaction. For Slaanesh, he would be a nightmare of sterile agony, a contradiction to everything that God embodies. Nurgle, perhaps, would find him most amusing. The rider is trapped in a cycle of endless torment, enslaved to a destiny he cannot escape. This echoes Nurgle's philosophy of despair, of suffering accepted and transformed into endurance. Yet the difference lies in the outcome. Ghost Rider does not embrace decay, he incinerates it. The great corruptor might chuckle at his plight, but Nurgle's demons would flee from his cleansing flames. This raises a staggering possibility. Could Ghost Rider actually kill a Chaos God? Theoretically, no. The Chaos Gods are not individuals in the way mortals understand. They are the sum of emotions, concepts embodied by the warp. One man, no matter how cursed, cannot erase hatred, ambition, excess, or despair from existence. Yet within their domains, Ghost Rider could become a weapon of disruption, a predator unlike any other. His flames could carve holes into the warp, annihilating lesser demons, destabilizing cults, and severing the fragile link between mortal guilt and demonic power. He could not kill the gods themselves, but he could starve them. But what of Ghost Rider himself? Would he see the warp as kin to his infernal curse? The landscapes of the Imperium, with its seas of fire, rivers of blood, and endless screams, would echo the imagery of hell that his curse evokes. Might he begin to question whether his power is truly unique, or if, in some forgotten age, the warp itself birthed the entity that enslaved him? Perhaps Zarathos, the demon often linked to the rider's origin in Marvel lore, is nothing more than a shard of chaos given form in another universe. If so, then Ghost Rider is not merely a foreign intruder in 40K, but a wayward child of its deepest truth, the warp as the ultimate source of torment. This realization could destabilize even the rider's incorruptible will. His mission is vengeance against the guilty. But what happens when the very cosmos is guilty? When every man, woman, alien, and demon is complicit in an eternal cycle of war, bloodshed, and cruelty? Would the rider's curse compel him to judge not individuals, but reality itself? Would he attempt the impossible, to burn the galaxy clean, to annihilate both Chaos and Imperium alike, leaving nothing but ashes in his wake? This is the true terror of Ghost Rider in Warhammer 40K. Not that he slays demons, or humbles inquisitors, or frightens cultists, but that his presence forces the galaxy to confront an unforgiving truth. In a universe where everyone is guilty, judgment without end means apocalypse without mercy. And so, as we move forward, we must consider the long-term impact of the rider's curse. How would his endless war reshape the balance of power in the galaxy? Would he remain a lone wanderer, feared and worshipped in equal measure? Or would his legend give rise to movements, cults, or even crusades carried out in his burning name? Ghost Rider's legend within the Imperium would not remain contained to whispered stories or isolated encounters. In a galaxy where myth often shapes reality, his very existence would ripple outward, reshaping how mortals, Xenos, and even the Adeptus Astartes interpret the eternal war. To the common Imperial citizen, he would not appear as a cursed vigilante, but as a living saint of fire, a spectral judge clad in holy flame. In the grimdark corridors of Imperial superstition, every unexplained fire, every cult burned to ash overnight, would be attributed to his unseen hand. Songs would rise in underhives, prayers whispered in manufactorums, children told to fear the burning rider who punishes sinners at night. And in time, the ecclesiarchy would be forced to act. The imperial creed thrives on monopolizing symbols of divine power, and the Ghost Rider's image would be too potent to ignore. The Ministorum might attempt to canonize him, to fold his legend into the pantheon of imperial saints. They would commission sermons, painting him as a fiery angel of the emperor's will. Pilgrims would flock to shrines adorned with skeletal riders wreathed in golden halos of fire, praying for judgment upon their enemies. Yet this raises a dangerous paradox, for while the ecclesiarchy thrives on faith, Ghost Rider does not bend to their will. He does not punish heresy alone, but guilt, wherever he finds it. Priests themselves, corrupt cardinals, greedy abbots, even inquisitors with blood on their hands would find themselves condemned by his gaze. The Inquisition naturally would regard him as both asset and threat. Ordo Malleus inquisitors might hail him as a weapon against demons, a tool of divine providence whose mere presence could annihilate chaos. Yet others would see a danger beyond measure, a being immune to interrogation, unbound by loyalty to terror, guided only by a curse that no inquisitorial writ can control. To such minds, the Ghost Rider would represent a potential heresy greater than any Xenos infestation, for he embodies power outside the Emperor's sanctioned hierarchy. Some inquisitors might even form shadow crusades to hunt him, deploying assassins, psychers, and kill teams of Grey Knights. But even these paragons of demon-slaying purity would find themselves unsettled when their flaming target turned his penance stare upon them, forcing them to relive every hidden atrocity committed in the Emperor's name. Astartes Chapters 2 would respond with divided views. The Black Templars might embrace him, seeing his fiery crusade as a reflection of their own zealous hatred of heretics and witches. The Salamanders might respect his unyielding protection of the innocent, aligning his judgment with their humanitarian streak. But other chapters, like the Ultramarines, would recoil from his anarchic autonomy, for he obeys no chain of command, no codex, no lord. In his presence, the rigid structure of imperial law crumbles, replaced with a merciless higher law of guilt and vengeance. The Mechanicus would obsess over him in a different manner. To the tech priests of Mars, the Ghost Rider would not be a saint, but a mystery engine, a fusion of mortal and infernal energies, unlike any known machine or demon. They would attempt to study him, to capture fragments of his hellfire, to analyze the metaphysics of his flaming steed. The rider's bike, seemingly indestructible, powered by no visible fuel, would spark theological debates among the priesthood. Some would declare it a holy relic of the Omnissiah, while others whisper that it is a heretical blasphemy, an engine of the warp disguised in steel and flame. The prospect of reverse engineering such a machine could ignite conflicts between forge worlds desperate to claim the secret. Beyond the Imperium, alien races would also encounter him, and their interpretations would add to the tapestry of legend. The Eldar, so familiar with the warp's perils, would view him as an anomaly, neither psychic nor demonic, yet able to wound creatures of nightmare permanently. Farseers might interpret him as a shard of forgotten prophecy, a burning guardian sent to stem chaos's tide. Some craft worlds might even attempt to ally with him, though his unflinching gaze upon their own millennia of guilt would make them wary. The Orcs, ever simple in their brutality, would adore him in their own chaotic way. To them, he would be De Bernie Boss, a warrior who makes the biggest flames and fights the hardest fights. Warbands might form around effigies of flaming skulls, with mechs desperately trying to replicate his infernal bike with crude, smoke-belching machines. In a twisted irony, Ghost Rider's appearance could inadvertently unify Orc clans into massive crusades, all roaring into battle in his burning image. The Tyranids, mindless and alien, would react differently still. While they cannot fear or worship, their synaptic web might register him as an anomaly, prey unlike any other, whose flames resist even the hive mind's psychic grip. Swarms might hesitate before him, their instinctive drives stalling under the weight of something outside their natural cycle. Yet such hesitation would never last long, for the hive devours all, and even Ghost Rider would find himself besieged by endless claws and teeth. The Necrons, ancient and soulless, would regard him as a paradox. His flames, which burn the soul itself, mean little to beings without spirit. Yet his curse, his binding to infernal will, might remind them of their own ancient bargain with the Satan. Some Necron lords, haunted by dim echoes of their lost mortality, might see in him a reflection of their own eternal damnation, a figure who embodies what they sacrificed to gain immortality. To them, Ghost Rider might not be a foe, but a mirror. In this way, Ghost Rider's presence becomes more than an anomaly. He is a force of redefinition, a catalyst who reshapes how every race and faction in the galaxy perceives guilt, judgment, and eternity. His flames burn not only the guilty, but the myths and structures that hold the galaxy together. Where he passes, faith is shaken, terror grows, and even gods take notice. The most unsettling question, however, remains not how the galaxy reacts to Ghost Rider, but how he reacts to the galaxy. For every encounter brings him face to face with a reality where innocence is scarce and guilt is universal. Can his curse remain focused on the wicked when the very fabric of Warhammer 40K is woven from cruelty, oppression, and endless bloodshed? If the rider is compelled to judge the guilty, then is there any soul in the galaxy he would spare? And if none are spared, then perhaps his curse is not salvation, but the herald of apocalypse itself. In the end, the fate of Ghost Rider in Warhammer 40K hinges on one fundamental question. Can a being of cursed justice coexist with a universe that knows only endless war and survival? To answer this, we must consider how the rider would evolve as his legend spread. The Imperium thrives on symbols. Saints, martyrs, and heroes are elevated beyond their mortal selves into living embodiments of faith. Ghost Rider, though never seeking worship, could be transfigured by the Imperium's collective belief into something far more potent than even Zarathos intended. Stories would paint him as the flaming angel of vengeance, a herald of divine wrath sent to punish the heretic and purge the mutant. Priests would seize on his imagery, sermons thundering with descriptions of his burning chains striking down chaos cults. In this way, his curse could be reinterpreted as sanctity, but this exaltation would come at a cost. The Imperium has never tolerated independence. To serve its machine, Ghost Rider would be expected to bend knee, to channel his punishment not toward corruption within the ecclesiarchy or the Inquisition, but toward external enemies only. Yet the rider's very essence is rebellion against such manipulation. He judges without regard for rank or creed, and in a regime where corruption festers even at the highest levels, he would inevitably turn his gaze inward. This paradox, revered yet feared, sainted yet hunted, would define his existence. The Imperium would struggle to contain him, while the Chaos Gods would see in him a rival and a prize. Already, whispers in the warp would speak of the burning rider, whose penance stare rivals the gaze of Khorne's own blood-soaked fury. Slaanesh would crave to taste his agony, Tzeentch to twist his curse, Nurgle to smother his fire, and Khorne to bind his fury to eternal slaughter. Each would offer temptation, though none could bind him. Xenos species, too, would encounter the rider in ways unique to their natures. Orcs might revere him as a walking effigy of the Bernie god, charging into battle with greater frenzy when he appears. Eldar would perceive in him a shard of something older, a primal force of punishment that echoes the forgotten powers that shaped the warp. Some Farseers might even attempt to manipulate him as they do other human pawns, only to learn that no scheme holds sway over one who judges from the soul outward. Most haunting of all would be his encounters with the Necrons. For these soulless machine kings, Ghost Rider would appear as a reminder of all they had forsaken. His penance stare, finding no soul to burn, might falter, or worse, reflect their eternal damnation back upon them in ways even they cannot comprehend. Imagine a Necron overlord, its consciousness flooded with the weight of all the lives its dynasty destroyed before biotransference, crumbling beneath the weight of sins long buried. For beings who believe themselves beyond guilt, this would be a horror greater than annihilation. The galaxy would not be the same. Even a single rider, roaming from system to system, would shift the balance of faith and fear. His presence would inspire uprisings, topple tyrants, and sow terror among those who thought themselves untouchable. In time, he might gather followers, not worshippers, but damned souls seeking penance, crusaders drawn to the fire of his example. A cult of atonement, one not built on promises of paradise, but on the certainty of judgment. And through it all, the rider's curse would burn brighter. For in the grim darkness of the far future, where guilt is universal and innocence is rare, the spirit of vengeance would find no shortage of work. Perhaps too much. His chains would grow heavy, his skull aflame with the torment of countless souls. There is no rest for the guilty, and in the 41st millennium, none are free of guilt. This, then, is the ultimate truth. Ghost Rider would neither save nor damn the galaxy. He would not alter its eternal war or end the madness of chaos. Instead, he would become one more myth among many, a firebrand streaking across the endless night. To some, he is salvation. To others, damnation. To all, a reminder that judgment cannot be evaded, even in a universe that has forgotten mercy. And perhaps, in the quiet moments between battles, as his chains cool and his fire dims, Johnny Blaze would wonder, did he make a difference? Or did the galaxy consume even him as it consumes all things? The answer, like the rider himself, would remain a flame that refuses to die, burning ever onward into the darkness. Ghost Rider's presence in the galaxy could never remain confined to battles and whispered myths. In a civilization like the Imperium, where every unexplained phenomenon becomes fodder for faith, rumor, and fear, his legend would ignite like wildfire. The stories of a skeletal rider wreathed in eternal flame, appearing without warning to punish the guilty, would spread from the lowest hive slums to the highest spires of terror. And as with all legends in the 41st millennium, truth would bend under the weight of belief. In the underhives, where darkness and hunger breed desperation, Ghost Rider would be seen as both curse and salvation. Mothers would whisper his name to their children at night, warning them not to steal, not to lie, lest the burning rider find them. Gang leaders and cultists who vanished in blazes of hellfire would become cautionary tales, their smoldering ashes left behind as grim reminders. Yet others would see him as a champion, someone who dared strike against the corrupt enforcers, the slavers, and the guilders who had long preyed upon the weak. Graffiti would scrawl across crumbling hab-block walls, a flaming skull, haloed in crude strokes of paint. Above the hives, Whispers would find their way into the ecclesiarchy itself. The ministorum thrives on symbols, and here was one too powerful to ignore. Pilgrims would begin to claim miracles, a cult purged in fire the same night they prayed for deliverance, or a tyrant burned to ash on the eve of a shrine's consecration. Priests, desperate for influence, would seize upon these stories, proclaiming Ghost Rider as a fiery angel of the Emperor's divine wrath. Soon, sermons thundered with his name, painting him as Saint Incendius, the Burning Herald, or the Rider of Judgment. Shrines began to rise, adorned with skeletal icons wreathed in golden flames. But herein lay the paradox. Ghost Rider is no saint, and he is no servant of the Emperor. His curse is absolute and indiscriminate. Guilt is punished no matter its source. In the golden cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy, where corruption often festers beneath jeweled vestments, priests themselves would find their souls laid bare. Cardinals who embezzled tithes, abbots who betrayed vows, even preachers who preached faith but lived hypocrisy, all would burn under his gaze. And with every cleric judged, the paradox grew sharper. Was this a saint come to purify the church, or a demon unmasking it? The Inquisition, of course, would take notice. The Ordo Malleus would argue for his use as a weapon, a living tool of divine providence that could annihilate demons permanently. The Ordo Hereticus, however, would declare him a danger beyond reckoning, an unsanctioned force, immune to interrogation and control. Some inquisitors would dream of bending his curse to their cause. Others would see only the need to end him. Grey Knights might be dispatched, their purity tested in the fires of his judgment. Shadow wars would erupt, as inquisitors who revered him clashed with those who hunted him. The Adeptus Astartes would likewise split in their views. To the Black Templars, Ghost Rider would be a fiery crusader, a living embodiment of righteous fury. They might even ride beside him, their banners snapping in the firelight. The Salamanders, protectors of the innocent, would see his devotion to justice as kin to their own humanitarian spirit. But the Ultramarines and their successors, keepers of order and the Codex Astartes, would recoil. He obeys no law but his own, no chain of command, no creed but judgment. His very existence undermines the structure of imperial authority. On Mars and across the Forge worlds, the Mechanicus would fall into near mania. To the tech priests, Ghost Rider is not a saint, but a mystery machine, an engine of divine contradiction. His bike, indestructible and powered by no visible means, would spark endless debate. Some would call it a relic of the Omnissiah, others a heretical abomination. Forge worlds might war over fragments of his flames, captured in stasis jars, or blueprint sketches of his infernal chains. For the Mechanicus, the Rider is not a myth, but a puzzle, and puzzles demand solutions, no matter the cost. Beyond the Imperium, the legend would ripple further still. The Eldar, long students of the warp, would recognize him as something alien, an anomaly that defies the psychic laws of the galaxy. To their farseers, his existence would read like prophecy, a shard of punishment from a forgotten age. Some might attempt to ally with him, desperate to harness his fire against chaos, yet each would recoil when his gaze turned upon their own guilt, their millennia of manipulation, arrogance, and betrayal. The Orcs, ever blunt in their interpretations, would embrace him wholeheartedly. To them, he would be the Bernie Boss, the loudest, flashiest, and most terrifying fighter they'd ever seen. Mechs would labor to recreate his flaming bike, strapping scrap metal together into roaring infernal engines. Warbands might even rally to his name, charging into battle with flaming skull banners. Ironically, Ghost Rider's very appearance might unify orc clans into crusades larger and more devastating than any seen before. The Necrons, by contrast, would find in him something far more disturbing. His hellfire consumes souls, and though they have none, his penance stare might still pierce the veil of their forgotten past. Imagine a Necron overlord gazing into his eyes, only to relive the slaughter of his own people during biotransference, the endless deaths for which he is responsible. For beings who pride themselves on cold, soulless logic, such revelation would be intolerable. Some might shatter under the weight of guilt long denied. Through it all, Ghost Rider himself would not change. He would not revel in worship, nor seek armies, nor crave dominion. He is a curse, not a king, a flame, not a god. And yet the galaxy around him would shift regardless. Myths would grow. Faith would warp. Wars would erupt in his name. For some, he is salvation. For others, damnation. To all, he is the fire that judges when no law or creed dares to. And perhaps this is the greatest horror of all. In a galaxy where innocence is rare and guilt universal, the Rider's curse can never rest. His work is endless, his judgment without end. He is not salvation nor apocalypse. He is both, depending only on who stands in his burning gaze. The reach of Ghost Rider's presence would inevitably extend far beyond Imperial borders, rippling into the dark expanse where other powers of the galaxy hold sway. And though the Imperium's endless rumors, sermons, and wars already reshape his legend, the other great civilizations of the 41st millennium would confront their own terrors when the Rider's flames touched their worlds. For the forces of chaos, Ghost Rider is paradox made manifest. He is a being born of damnation, his power drawn from a curse that resonates with the essence of hell itself. And yet, his judgment burns not only mortals, but demons, their forms unraveling in permanent annihilation under the weight of his penance stare. No warp entity, no matter how ancient, can withstand the full force of being confronted with every sin it has ever committed across eternity. For the great powers of chaos, this makes him a singular threat. Imagine the Black Legion, under the command of Abaddon the Despoiler, launching a raid upon an Imperial shrine world. The cultists burn, the defenders crumble, and demons pour into reality like waves of fire. Then, without warning, the battlefield itself glows with another flame, cold and merciless. Ghost Rider rides straight through the demonic tide, his chains searing warp flesh, his skull burning brighter than any sorcerer's fire. Where others banish demons temporarily, his curse ends them absolutely, erasing them from the warp as though they had never existed. The shrieks of obliterated demons echo into silence, leaving only ash. For chaos, this is more terrifying than any weapon the Imperium wields. Word of such encounters would spread quickly across the Eye of Terror. Some warbands would avoid him at all costs, refusing to raid systems where the Burning Rider is rumored to appear. Others, drunk on arrogance, would seek to test themselves against him, only to find their champions reduced to molten chains and flames. Sorcerers of Tzeentch, fascinated by paradox, might attempt to bind or study him, crafting labyrinthine rituals to unravel the nature of his curse. Yet every summoning would fail. For Ghost Rider is no demon, no psyker, no creature of the warp. He is something else entirely, an exile, an enigma, a judgment outside their understanding. To Khorne, the Rider would appear as both insult and fascination. Here is a warrior who slays with endless fire, who burns the guilty with no concern for glory or blood spilled. Yet the sheer violence of his presence, his chains whirling, his bike screaming across the battlefield, his refusal to die, would draw the gaze of the blood god. Khorne might roar his approval, but he would never command the rider, for the rider does not revel in war. He revels in punishment. For Slaanesh, the rider's fire is agony incarnate, a torment with no pleasure, only truth. Demons of excess who face his stare would wither into silence, unable to twist their sins into beauty. To Nurgle, the rider is nothing short of despair, a cleansing flame that burns away rot without leaving rebirth behind. And to Tzeentch, he is a riddle that cannot be rewritten. Meanwhile, the Tau Empire would hear of him not through faith, but through pragmatic intelligence. When trade fleets vanish, reduced to drifting hulks filled with charred corpses of slavers and corrupt officials, whispers circulate among the ethereals. Some see him as a dangerous rogue element, destabilizing carefully laid plans of expansion. Others, however, might see in him a potential ally, a being whose presence inspires fear in the lawless fringes of space. Envoys could attempt to contact him, offering diplomacy, alliance, even integration into the greater good. But what words could sway a curse? When a fire-caste commander guilty of war crimes stares into his eyes and collapses in screams, the Tau would quickly realize that no ideology, no greater good, can bend the rider's judgment. He will not choose sides. The Dark Eldar of Commorragh, too, would learn fear. For them, sin is sustenance, torment is art, and cruelty is life itself. Yet Ghost Rider's presence strikes directly at the heart of their decadence. To look into his gaze is to relive every scream inflicted, every soul shattered, every life consumed for sport. Even the most sadistic Archon, arrogant in their mastery of suffering, could not withstand such reflection. In the labyrinthine arenas of Commorragh, when whispers spread that a flaming figure rides through the shadows of the webway, panic would rise. Some would hunt him for sport, but others would realize the terrible truth. There is no sport in facing a curse that cannot die. The Orcs, however, would remain the strange exception. To them, Ghost Rider is still the Bernie boss, a figure to cheer for rather than fear. They would race scrap bikes through firestorms, trying to imitate his blazing ride, never truly understanding his purpose. Yet even here, his curse would manifest. Orc warlords who betray their own clans, who slaughter their boys for selfish gain, would find themselves judged. The spectacle of a war boss burning alive in front of his warband would only deepen their belief. The Bernie boss is real, and he is watching. For the Orcs, that would make him the loudest, brightest banner to follow into war. But among the Necrons, the effect would be most profound. For an ancient race that buried its guilt beneath cold metal and endless time, the penance stare is a weapon beyond imagination. Overlords, cryptex, and even the Silent King himself would find themselves haunted by echoes of biotransference, of the countless souls sacrificed for their immortality. In the Rider's flame, the Necrons would see the sins they chose to forget. Some dynasties might shatter under the weight of those revelations, collapsing into madness or silence. Others might seek to annihilate him utterly, building weapons designed not to kill his body, but to erase his very curse. Yet even in such fury, they would only prove how deeply his judgment cuts. Through it all, Ghost Rider himself would remain unchanged. He is not a general, not a conqueror, not a god seeking dominion. He does not bargain, does not ally, does not waver. He appears where guilt festers, burns until it is purged, and then vanishes into the void once more. And this is what terrifies the galaxy most. He cannot be controlled. He cannot be reasoned with. He does not care for the banners of the Imperium, the promises of the greater good, or the whispers of chaos. His curse is eternal, his mission endless, his fire without master. If the galaxy is a crucible where faith, corruption, and ambition endlessly collide, then Ghost Rider is the flame that licks at its edges, reminding all who see him of the cost of their sins. To the Imperium, he is both saint and heretic. To Chaos, both demon and scourge. To Xenos, both legend and horror. But to himself, he is nothing but the Rider, damned, unyielding, forever burning. The Imperium has always been defined by contradiction. It is a galaxy of faith, yet rife with corruption, a realm of zealotry, yet built on silence about truths too dangerous to speak. Ghost Rider, the spirit of vengeance, did not belong to such a place. Yet here, among its shadows and fire, he became more than a legend. He became a fulcrum. By the time his existence spread beyond whispered prayers and forbidden cults, Ghost Rider had been sighted across half the galaxy. From hive cities to demon worlds, from the rusted wastes of Armageddon to the void fortresses of the Necrons, the Rider left a trail of burned corruption and shattered lies. And yet, as his influence grew, the question deepened. Was he an ally of the Emperor's divine mission, or an unpredictable rogue spirit doomed to destabilize everything he touched? For the ecclesiarchy, Ghost Rider was both a blessing and a curse. Pilgrims who once bowed before statues of saints now prayed for the Rider's fire to cleanse their sins. Preachers struggled. Should they denounce him as a demon or embrace him as a vessel of the Emperor's wrath? On shrine worlds, processions carried banners depicting a flaming skull. In the catacombs of Terror itself, rumors spread among the Ministerum's lower clergy that the Rider was an incarnation of Dawn, or perhaps even the Emperor's own spirit, returning to walk among men. The High Lords of Terror could not allow such a figure to remain uncontrolled. To them, faith outside their sanction was heresy. Thus began a holy inquisition, not against Ghost Rider himself, but against those who spoke his name in reverence. But unlike other heresies, this one burned too brightly to be snuffed out. The more the Ministerum tried to silence the Rider's cults, the more his image spread like wildfire. The Inquisition, too, was divided. Some Ordo Hereticus lords demanded his destruction, branding him a warp entity too dangerous to exist. Others, quietly, advocated for his weaponization. If the Imperium could turn the Rider into a sanctioned saint, a living symbol of terror against heresy, it would wield a force that even chaos might hesitate to confront. And yet, how does one leash vengeance itself? Ghost Rider was not swayed by politics, nor did he bend knee to banners or crowns. He served a higher judgment, raw, uncompromising justice. To the Rider, a corrupt cardinal and a chaos sorcerer were the same, guilty souls deserving only flame. This indifference terrified the Inquisition more than any demon. For the first time, the Imperium faced a force it could not bribe, manipulate, or chain. Among the Space Marines, the Rider became a story of division. Some chapters hailed him as a divine ally. The Black Templars, in particular, whispered that the Rider was proof of the Emperor's continuing presence in the galaxy. They claimed his fire was the Emperor's light, burning through the lies of the heretic. Others were less forgiving. The Ultramarines saw him as a destabilizing rogue, outside the bounds of imperial order. To them, the Rider's unpredictability was a liability, a threat to the fragile cohesion of the Imperium's war machine. Aboard the fortress monastery of the Dark Angels, librarians debated whether the Rider might have glimpsed the fallen in his endless hunt. If so, he was a danger to their secrets, a flame, threatening to expose what the chapter had spent millennia burying. The chaos reaction. If the Imperium feared him, chaos despised him. In the eye of terror, demons shrieked whenever his name was spoken. He was a presence they could not tempt or corrupt. Unlike mortals, the rider bore no desire, no lust for power. His soul was already consumed in eternal penance. To the dark gods, he was an anomaly, a mortal-born spirit immune to the lures of the warp. Some whispered he was an insult to chaos itself, a living refutation of their dominion. Thus the Chaos Legions began to hunt him. World Eaters sought his skull for Khorne's throne. Sorcerers of Tzeentch schemed to unravel his power. Slaanesh dreamed of silencing his eternal fire. And Nurgle, patient, calculating, simply wondered if rot could extinguish vengeance. Yet for all their fury, the rider endured. His chains tore through demonic flesh. His penance stare reduced millennia of corruption into ashes of guilt. He was not invincible, but he was inexhaustible, driven by a will even gods could not shatter. The legend of the pyre. As centuries passed, stories of the rider took on new forms. Some claimed he rode across the stars themselves, his chains dragging flaming comets that scourged heretic fleets. Others swore he walked among mortals in disguise, a hooded figure whose eyes smoldered only when judgment was near. In one infamous campaign, entire regiments of the Astra Militarum swore loyalty not to the Aquila, but to the burning skull. They marched into battle with chains wrapped around their armor, chanting hymns to the rider of the pyre. The commissariat executed hundreds for blasphemy, but their zeal only grew stronger. Ghost Rider was no longer a man, nor a demon, nor even a singular entity. He had become an idea, an eternal reminder that no sin, no matter how well hidden, would escape flame. The Silent King's return. Amidst this storm, the Necron Silent King continued to watch. For Zarek, Ghost Rider was both a curiosity and a warning. The rider had gazed into the soul of the Necrons and forced them to remember their crimes. To Sarek, this was both horrifying and necessary. The Necrons had long abandoned morality, dismissing such concerns as relics of their flesh. Yet the rider forced them to confront what they had become. Some Necron lords began to falter, haunted by flashes of the flesh they had forsaken. Ghost Rider had planted doubt in machines that knew only obedience. For the first time in aeons, cracks appeared in the dynasty's unity. The endless war. As the galaxy hurtled further into the abyss of the 41st millennium, the rider remained. He was not a general, not a king, not even a prophet. He was fire. Wherever corruption festered, he appeared. Wherever souls tried to hide from guilt, he found them. To the Imperium, he was both saint and scourge. To chaos, he was blasphemy incarnate. To the Xenos, he was judgment without mercy. And through it all, Ghost Rider himself spoke little. He did not seek worship. He did not demand allegiance. His fire burned not for glory, but for truth. The terrible, unyielding truth that no soul could escape its sins forever. But the galaxy is not static. The stars shift, empires fall, and even legends face choices that define eternity. For Ghost Rider, that choice would come in the form of the Emperor himself. Would the rider stand against the master of mankind as a rival judge? Or would he become the Emperor's most terrible instrument of vengeance, unleashed without restraint upon a galaxy already aflame? That reckoning between fire and God, between vengeance and divinity, was inevitable. And it would decide not only the fate of the rider, but the fate of all who lived beneath the grim darkness of the far future. The galaxy burns with stories. Some fade into myth, others calcify into dogma, but a few live on as eternal flames, defying both time and silence. Ghost Rider was one such flame, uncontrolled, unbroken, and unyielding. By the late centuries of M41, his legend had become unavoidable. Across the Imperium, the ecclesiarchy tried to erase him from scripture, branding his image heretical even as desperate priests invoked his fire in whispered prayers. Inquisitors debated whether to destroy or wield him. Space Marines argued if he was saint or scourge, and the common man only knew one truth. When the rider came, corruption burned. But every fire eventually draws the gaze of gods. The Emperor, silent upon his golden throne for 10,000 years, does not speak as mortals do. Yet the warp trembles with his will. And as Ghost Rider's legend grew into something the Imperium could not contain, a moment of reckoning loomed. Could the rider, a cursed soul of vengeance, stand in judgment of the master of mankind himself? The Emperor's fire. Some whispered that the rider was the Emperor's shadow made flesh, a shard of his wrath cast into the galaxy to purge the guilty where the Imperium had failed. Others feared the opposite, that the rider was proof the Emperor's divinity was not unique, that justice could manifest in a form separate from the throne. If the Emperor chose to act, the galaxy would shudder. Perhaps he would call the rider into his presence, chains clattering across the darkened halls of the Imperial Palace. Picture it, a flaming skull bowing before a corpse god of golden light, two fires meeting, one of vengeance, one of divinity. Would the Emperor anoint him a saint, or would the rider's unbending curse find even the Emperor guilty of sins long buried? The penance stare sees all. Even gods cannot escape their choices. Chaos reacts. In the eye of terror, the Chaos gods roared their hatred. To them, Ghost Rider was a paradox they could not devour. He was no servant of the warp, no champion of the Imperium, no pawn of ambition. He was judgment itself, eternal and incorruptible. Khorne demanded his skull, but could not claim it. Slaanesh craved his agony, but could not twist it. Nurgle sought to drown his fire in rot, but only fed its brightness. Tzeentch unraveled countless schemes, yet every thread snapped when faced with the rider's simple truth. Guilt burns. To Chaos, Ghost Rider was a scar that would not heal, a reminder that some flames cannot be extinguished. The Xenos dilemma. Xenos races, too, could not ignore him. The Tau, with their greater good, found their ethereals shaken when the rider judged one of their own guilty of hidden atrocities. Eldar Farseers saw in him echoes of ancient powers that predated the Chaos gods, something primal and dangerous. To the Orcs, he was still Deberni Boss, a figure of wild joy and terror, leading them unknowingly toward battles that ended in their cleansing. But it was the Necrons who struggled most. For an undying race that had silenced morality, the rider was an unwanted mirror. Some dynasties cracked beneath his stare, their overlords driven to madness. Others vowed vengeance, constructing vast weapons not to kill him, but to erase his curse from reality itself. The eternal question. In the end, Ghost Rider remained unchanged. He was not a prophet, not a conqueror, not even a savior. He burned corruption wherever it hid, and then vanished into the void once more. But his presence left scars on the galaxy. New cults rose in his name. Chaos warbands avoided systems where his fire was rumored to burn. Necron dynasties fractured. Even the High Lords of Terror whispered his name in fear. And always, the same question lingered. Was he the Emperor's instrument or his rival? Perhaps the answer was never meant to be given. For the rider's curse is not about allegiance, but about truth. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where innocence is almost extinct, truth is the harshest flame of all. Epilogue. So the legend endures, a flaming skull racing across the stars, chains trailing like comets, fire reflecting in the eyes of sinners who know their time has come. To some, he is salvation, to others, damnation. But to all, he is inevitable. Ghost Rider, the spirit of vengeance, forever burning in the 41st millennium.